If you had asked anyone in Ridgeline, Montana, what they knew about Joseph Hale, you would have gotten the same answer from every person you asked, which is one of the signs that a town has made up its mind about something and stopped looking for reasons to revise it. They would have told you he was a man who had come from somewhere worse than here, that he had done things in that somewhere that the law in 2 territories had formed opinions about, and that he kept a spread on the north edge of town with 10 acres and a deliberate solitude that did not invite questions and had not received any. They would have told you he was the kind of man you were polite to from across the street and did not attempt to know personally, because knowing him personally seemed like the kind of project that cost more than it returned. What they would not have told you, because they did not know it themselves, is that none of that was wrong, and none of it was the whole picture either. The picture that Ridgeline had of Joseph Hale was accurate, the way an outline is accurate. It had the shape of the thing without the interior of it, and the interior was where everything that mattered about him actually lived. He had spent 12 years doing difficult work for difficult men in circumstances that did not always make the more honorable option available. He had been the kind of man the frontier used and then left to make his own accounting with, and he had come back to this territory at 33 with enough money to buy the North Edge spread and the clear intention of conducting that accounting slowly and without shortcuts. He was not a good man trying to become better. That is a simpler story than the one he was actually living. He was a careful man trying to become decent, which requires you to keep a different set of books. It requires you to know clearly what you have been and what you intend to be, and to hold the distance between those 2 things in your view every day without letting it become either an excuse for reverting or a reason to perform a goodness you have not yet earned. 3 years on that North Edge spread, and he had built something that resembled the life he was aiming at. He paid his bills at the general store in cash and on time. He did not make claims on anyone's attention and did not receive any. He worked his land and maintained his fence line and cared for his animals with the same methodical patience he gave everything. And he kept to himself with the specific deliberateness of a man who knows that the most reliable way to avoid becoming a problem for other people is to avoid becoming a presence in their lives that they have to manage. 3 years of that discipline. 3 years without incident. Every morning before light, he walked the property line. He had started this in his first week and had not stopped. Not because anything was ever wrong, but because the habit of checking costs nothing, and the cost of not checking arrives all at once when you are least positioned to pay it. Joseph had paid that cost before in situations that did not offer second opportunities, and he had decided he was done with situations that did not offer second opportunities. On the 7th of November in 1884, he walked the fence line in the dark the way he always did, and when he came around to the barn, he noticed that the door was standing a 1/4 inch farther open than he had left it the night before. He picked up the lantern and went in. The light moved through the barn the way lantern light moves in large cold spaces, reaching the nearest things first and leaving the far corners to figure themselves out. He walked the length of the space, past the horses, who were awake and quiet in the way horses are when something is different, and they have decided to observe it rather than react to it. He reached the back corner near the water trough and found in the straw Maeve. She was small, dark hair matted and damp against her face, wearing clothes that told him immediately, before any other assessment, that she had been traveling in the cold for longer than those clothes were designed for by a significant margin. She was still in the particular way that very exhausted people are still, not the stillness of rest, but the stillness of a body that has spent everything it has on the work of staying alive and has nothing left over for anything else. Her eyes were open. She was looking at him with the expression that he recognized before he had finished forming a thought about it. He had seen that expression before, not on this face, not in this barn, but he knew what it was, the way you know weather patterns you have survived, with the specific alertness of someone who understands the shape of what they are looking at. It was the look of a person who has already decided what is about to happen and has concluded there is nothing available to be done about it, so she might as well stay still and let it unfold. It was not an expression that had developed recently. It was the look of something that had been built over time, through repeated exposure to outcomes that confirmed the same prediction. He pulled his coat off and set it on the ground beside her. She did not take it. He went back to the house to heat water, because that was the first practical thing, and he was a man who moved toward the first practical thing while he was still working out the rest. What he did not do in that hour tells you more about who he actually was than anything the town of Ridgeline would have been able to offer. He did not ask her to explain herself. He did not ask her name or her situation, or what she was doing in his barn, or where she had come from, or who had sent her, or who was looking for her. He understood, with the knowledge of someone who has spent time in circumstances where being asked to explain yourself when you are not safe enough to do so is a form of pressure and not a form of courtesy. That demanding explanation from someone who cannot yet give it is not a request. It is pressure dressed as a question. He did not want her to feel any more pressure than she was already carrying. He heated the water. He put food on the table. He sat on the far side of the room and let her decide what the next moment required. She came inside on her own. That was the only decision that mattered in the first hours. She made it herself. In the hour after she came inside, before she had said a single word, Joseph gathered the story she was not telling from the evidence she could not hide and was not trying to hide. Her left wrist showed him something he recognized in the specific way you recognize a kind of damage that has a particular shape, the shape that distinguishes it from the marks that weather and work and accidents leave. She flinched at sudden movement, specifically at the movement of hands in her direction, which is the kind of specific flinch that develops from specific experience. She tracked the distance between herself and the door with the focused and automatic attention of someone who has spent a significant amount of time in rooms where knowing the nearest exit was a practical consideration and not a precaution. She did not speak. Joseph had been around shy people, and he had been around people who had gone quiet in the temporary way, and people who had gone quiet in a way that was not temporary, where the words were not waiting behind the silence, but had gone somewhere that silence could not easily reach. He understood the difference between those things, and he knew which one he was looking at. The fever came in the afternoon. It did not arrive suddenly, but the way things arrive that have been building without announcement, settling into her face and her breathing by degrees, until by evening it was in the kind of territory that concerned him. By the time the temperature outside dropped into the range that 11 winters on the frontier had taught him was not survivable for someone already as compromised as she was, he made the decision that broke every principle he had built his 3 years of careful living around. He had built those 3 years around one governing idea: keep things simple, keep them manageable. Do not accumulate complications you did not seek and cannot control. It was a sound principle. It had served him. He had not deviated from it once. He looked at the young woman on the other side of the cabin, shivering in the way that a body shivers when the shiver itself is the last available mechanism for maintaining warmth, and he crossed the room and picked her up, carefully, with the specific attention of someone who understands that the manner of a thing matters as much as the doing of it. He carried her to the hearth. He made his bed on the floor beside it. This is the part that Ridgeline, Montana, would not have believed if someone had attempted to describe it. Joseph Hale, the man they maintained a polite but careful distance from, the man no one had been inside whose cabin in 3 years, spent that November night on the floor of his own home, tending a fever he had no guarantee of breaking for a young woman whose name he still did not know, with the methodical and unhurried attention of someone who has decided that this is the work that the present moment requires, and the present moment is the only available moment. He changed the cloth on her forehead every 20 minutes. He kept the fire built. He monitored her breathing with the low-level constant attention of a man who has learned through experiences he does not discuss in detail that the moment you stop watching is the moment something goes wrong, and he was not going to stop watching. He talked to her, not because he was certain she could hear him. He talked because silence, when it is the only thing in a room, has weight to it that presses down on everything in the room, and he was trying to take some of the weight off her. He talked about the property the way he thought about it, in the specific and practical terms of a man who has built something with his hands and knows each part of it by the problem it presented and the solution he found. He talked about the north fence that had been leaning since September, the specific post that was the source of the problem, and what he intended to do about it before the hard freeze came and made the repair twice as difficult. He talked about the spring on the east side of the property that ran clean through all 12 months and that he had discovered in his first summer and considered among the 3 or 4 genuinely fortunate things about the land he had bought. He talked about the horses, their names and their individual habits, and the bay mare who had developed strong and specific opinions about the timing of morning feeding that did not match his schedule, and who communicated her disagreement through a persistence that he had over 2 years come to privately respect, because persistence in the service of a reasonable position was something Joseph understood and did not dismiss. He talked for a long time about small things, the texture of an ordinary life being built carefully out of the materials available to a man who has decided to build carefully, and something about the pace of it, the unhurried rhythm of a man accounting for his days without drama or apology, was a different presence in the room than the silence had been. The fever was not breaking, but somewhere in the second hour it had stopped climbing. Then something shifted in what he was saying, in the way a river shifts when the ground changes under it, without announcement and without a visible cause. He stopped talking about the fence. He sat with the quiet for a moment. The fire had settled into itself, burning low and steady, the kind of fire that has found its pace and is maintaining it without effort, and the room had gone to orange shadow except for the light it threw on her face. He said in a voice that had nothing performed in it, nothing addressed to any ear he knew was listening, "Nobody is going to hurt you here. That's done." He waited a moment, not for a response, but in the way a man waits when he is checking whether what he just said was true and deciding that it is. "I don't know what you came from. I don't need to know it tonight, but whatever it was, it is behind you now. This place is yours to be in for as long as you need, and you don't need to earn that or explain yourself or be anything other than whatever you are while you're here." He paused. "And if anyone comes looking for you with the wrong kind of intentions, they will have to come through me before they reach you. That's not a threat to you. That's a promise to you. There is a specific difference between those two things, and I want you to be clear about which one it is." The fire shifted. He changed the cloth. He sat back down on the floor. Then he said quietly to the room as much as to her, "I'm sorry it took you getting this sick before you found somewhere safe." Then he went back to watching. Her breathing, the fire, the cloth, the slow passage of the night through its heaviest middle hours toward the beginning of something else. What Joseph Hale did not know, and could not have known, was that Maeve had been awake for the last 20 minutes. She had been awake and completely still with the practiced stillness of someone who has learned that the safest way to exist in a room you do not yet understand is to be very quiet in it. She had heard the fence. She had heard the bay mare and her opinions about feeding time. She had heard the shift happen in the middle of the conversation, the place where the talking moved from the surface of things into the thing underneath the surface. And she had heard every word of the promise he had not called a promise. She did not believe it yet. She was not in the condition to believe something on the basis of one night of evidence from a man she had not known existed before this evening. Belief was something she had learned to spend the way you spend money when you have very little left of it, with care, only when the return was close to certain. She did not have enough evidence yet for that expenditure, but something smaller than belief had happened in her during the last 20 minutes. A question had formed, the kind of question she had not had enough ground under her to hold before this night. The question was, what if the next room is different from the last one? She had not been able to ask it before. She had the barest, most cautious amount of ground to hold it on now. But questions are where healing begins when the door has been shut long enough that the person inside has lost track of which wall it's in. You don't need the answer first. You need the question to be able to form. The fever broke on the second day. Joseph went about the work of the property the way he always did, without ceremony, without adjusting the pace of things to accommodate the situation beyond what the situation actually required. He left food where she could reach it without having to ask. He kept his distance. He let the cabin be a place she could exist in at whatever pace existence required from her. She watched him from the window for 3 days before she came outside. On the 4th day, she was at the north fence when he arrived with the post digger to address the leaning post that had been a problem since September. He did not comment on her presence there, or ask what she was doing, or look at her with any expression that required a response. He started on the repair the way he started everything, methodically, without wasted motion. After a few minutes, she picked up the post and held it level while he filled the gap. The post went in straight in a single pass, where the lean had previously made it a task he had been managing awkwardly, alone. He looked at the post. He looked at her. He said, "That's better." She did not reply, but she was there for the rest of the fence work. And the next morning, she was at the barn before him, and the horses had been fed, and the bay mare had not expressed her usual opinion about the timing. What followed over the next months is not a story with a clean narrative shape, which is why stories like it tend to get simplified into something with cleaner edges than it actually had. It was the slow and irregular and sometimes halting process of two people learning to exist in the same space with the specific trust that two people who have both had reason to distrust the ground under them learn to extend to each other at the pace the ground actually requires. Maeve did not recover her voice in the way of a sudden unlocking. She found her way back to language the way water finds its way around a fallen tree, in small channels, each one tested before the next one tried. There were weeks where she communicated only through the grammar of physical presence, the continued showing up, the second cup brought to the table without asking, the decisions made about small things in the kitchen and the barn that accumulated over time into the shape of a person who had decided she was permitted to make decisions. In February, 3 months after the barn, she said his name, just his name, nothing attached to it, in the particular tone a person uses when they want someone to turn around and look at them. He turned around. She did not say anything else. She did not need to. The word itself carried everything she had been working toward since November, which was the simple and not simple act of addressing a specific person in a specific room in the belief that the address would be received in the spirit it was sent, that it was safe to speak, that the room would hold what she put into it. It was received in that spirit. Joseph Hale stood in the February morning outside his barn and heard his name spoken in a voice that had found its way back from somewhere that voices go when the world stops giving them reason to remain. And he received it with the same quality of attention he gave everything she offered him, which was unhurried and specific and without any demand toward him more than was ready. There is a piece of calico on the door of that cabin. Maeve bought it at the general store in Ridgeline in the spring of 1885. The first time she walked into town alone and asked for something she wanted without rehearsing the asking until it felt like an apology. It is a small piece of calico. It serves no practical function that anyone could identify. Joseph has never once suggested she take it down. The door it hangs on has not been locked since the night he decided that a person shivering in his barn was not a complication to be managed, but a person to be helped. That distinction between a complication and a person is either the simplest thing in the world or the most difficult one, depending entirely on what you have allowed yourself to see when you walk into a cold barn with a lantern before first light. Joseph Hale walked in with his eyes open. That is why this story ends the way it does.